The hard place, like a wind from Goldland, he sweeps by, blown far from his homeland in search of glory and honor. We walk in the garden of his turbulence.
Hello and welcome to Movie Joust. My name is Jesse Nussman, a film critic living here in Atlanta, and with me on the other line, fellow Atlanta film critics Jason Evans and Josh Sewell. Guys, we are reuniting after the holidays, or I guess it's like mid-holidays. We're reuniting after Thanksgiving. We're here to talk about the best movies of 2024, which I think we figured that this was a good time to talk about it because our organization, the Atlanta Film Critics Circle, we are, at least as we're recording this, on the verge of publishing our awards for what we thought were the best films and best performances of the year.
Yeah, and it should be noted that Josh and I are two of the vote counters, which means our weekend will be just a hellish mess of of spreadsheets and tallies. And probably me saying, oh, I think so-and-so won, and Josh going, wait, my numbers are different. And then we have to go through and do it all over again. It's no fun.
You guys are going to be the ones to blame when the Nosferatu hives are like, stop the steal.
Well, see, that's what frustrates me is like by the time this episode comes out, the wicked people won't know where to send the 4-figure bribes, to get all those nominations going.
Yeah, which movie fan base is going to be like trying to call you guys up and give you a quid pro quo to just sort of like bump those numbers up a little bit. Before we get into our top fives, I just wanted to kind of like take you guys' temperature. How do you guys feel the year 2024 has been at the movies? Good year, bad year, kind of meh? Jason, I'll start with you.
I would mostly go meh. There's nothing to me that I, like the film at the top of my list, which we'll get to obviously much later. It's a wonderful film and a revelation, and I really enjoyed watching it. But I don't think it. I'm not sure that it or most of the other films in my top 5 would have made my top 5 a year ago. I feel like the top this year hasn't been as good, and it's not as deep as usual. Usually I get down to 8, 9, 10, and I'm like, oh, there are like at least 5 or 6 films that could easily be here because they're all so wonderful. And I don't feel like I have that this year. I think we're clearly seeing an impact of the strikes that happened late last year, and just the quality of what we've gotten this year hasn't been nearly as good. Look, we've seen, the box office has struggled. Other than a few films that are carrying us, the box office is really struggling this year. And I think that's, partially a reflection of we just haven't had the quality we had hoped to get.
Josh, do you kind of agree?
Yeah, it's sort of in the same boat. Like, I always kind of roll my eyes at the people who are like, this year was a terrible year for movies. Like, I've been doing this for a really long time. And, I've never just experience like a garbage year for movies. There's always like gems where you can, as long as you know where to look. And I think being in the streaming era has really helped open that up for a lot of people. I remember when I was younger and would being the dorky kid that read all the top 10 lists, I was like, these are all movies that play 3 hours for me. And I have a Blockbuster, so I'm not ever going to see these indie movies. I think a lot of, if there's a nerdy younger me out there right now doesn't have that problem. Like, there's always those smaller movies that you can find. That being said, there's a lot of films this year, kind of like Jason said, where I was making my top 10. There are other years where I'm just hardcore passionate, where I'm like, if this doesn't make people's top 5s, I just don't know what to do. And like, like we'll get into later, like I still have some movies I'm passionate about, but like my 5 through 10 is me going like, I mean, these are all good, I guess. There's not anything other than a handful this year that I'm just like, telling people, if you have to drive to Atlanta or spend money on a ticket for these 2 movies, make it there's not really any that I'm like, evangelical about this year.
Yeah, this has sort of been a year where I definitely agree with you, Jason. Like, I think we really felt the impact of the strikes from last year, and next year seems like, not to get ahead on an episode we might do in January, but like next year seems like an abundance of riches, possibly, or maybe it's just a bunch of filmmakers and people who
it's hope,
are
man.
just my thing.
It's just your hope. You're hoping next year is better. We always hope.
Right. But even then, like, I agree with you guys. Like, I get to the end of every year, and there's always like a handful of things that I think are really special, and I've maybe evolved this year into thinking like, regardless of what the state of the business is, of what is getting dumped on what streaming platform versus getting theatrical exhibition, good movies find people, I think is sort of where I've just sort of landed. And even if, something that I like maybe doesn't get the same kind of big marketing push is like Wicked, where like the stars are going on every single morning show from like June until December, that makes an exercise like this, I think, fun in giving people ideas on movies that, hey, if you haven't seen it, just check it out. You might like it. And sometimes like the market doesn't put the right movies in front of people, but I tend to think that people are going to find good movies, whether it takes weeks, months, sometimes years, and generally I'm optimistic in the long run.
I mean, it's nice that you feel that way. Josh, you mentioned streaming earlier. I actually think that streaming has made it harder, that there's such an abundance of content out there, and you have to have 50 different subscriptions to get access to all of it, as if anyone on their right mind would want access to all of it. But I think that it has created a situation where people maybe have a harder time finding the little nuggets, that they're not as obvious as it used to be. Josh, you're talking about, trying to find these art house. It used to be there were art house theaters, and you'd be like, oh, if I go here, I'm going to see what I need to see if I'm a fan of really high quality, interesting films, not just blockbusters. Well, now a lot of that content is on Paramount, or it's on Hulu, or I'm not even gonna say Netflix or Apple or Prime, because those are the huge ones. So I think to some extent it's a little more difficult, and I think that's really unfortunate. I mean, like last year, one of the best films of the year, How to Blow Up a Pipeline, which our critics group really loved, and there were a number of us who said it was one of the top 2 or 3 movies of the entire year. No one saw that. It just if you ask the general public, people haven't even heard of that film.
Right.
And I don't know that that's going to be the case too much with the films this year, but there's certainly a couple of them that we're going to be mentioning on this podcast that a lot of people out there are going to be like, I haven't heard of that. And we're going to say, it's been in theaters for 3 months. It's on streaming right now. And you haven't heard of it.
So unless you got anything further to say, Josh, why don't we start with our top 5s? And we'll, if one comes up that is higher on another person's list, we'll talk about it in the moment. I think we're going to try and save our number 1 movies until the very end. But Jason, let's start with you with what your number 5 movie of the year is.
And the phenomenon I was talking about, I think, exists on this film. My number 5 film, and I want to caveat by saying there's still a few more films I need to see before my list is final. And there's a little piece of me that thinks I'm putting this here just so I can promote it more than the fact that I think it's actually the 5th best movie of the year. But the film is called My Old Ass. Yes, My Old Ass. It stars Aubrey Plaza, actually in a supporting role. Stars an actress named Maisie Stella, who was not a very big name actress, and she is a strong contender for like breakthrough awards this year. Like the actress that you haven't heard of that you need to hear about. The movie is about a teenage girl who's about to go off to college. She lives in sort of a farming kind of community. She's sort of eager to get out. One night she goes with a couple of her friends, and they dose some shrooms. And on her trip, she encounters a version of herself from about 20 years in the future, played by Aubrey Plaza. And, future her name is Elliot. Future Elliot doesn't want to say too much about, how to live your life. But she goes, oh, one thing, if you meet a guy named Chad, avoid him. Chad's bad news. Lo and behold, we meet Chad in the very next scene. And young Elliot starts falling in love with Chad. And this felt like a romance, teen romance comedy that wasn't that interesting or wasn't that unusual. I was watching it, I was enjoying it. I'm like, it's fine, but it's nothing special. And then something happens, which I will not give away, that really changes the way the entire complexion of what has happened in the film has been perceived so far, and changes all the messages that Elliot's been getting from the future. And to me, it becomes an incredible, like, testament about love and the importance of love in our lives, and how even though love can be terribly painful, love is still worth it. And to say that the end of the movie hit me hard is like the understatement of the year. It's just this totally surprising film. It's very competently done, very well acted, and you don't think it's anything, and then suddenly you're like, oh my God, this is a film that people need to see to think about their relationships.
I haven't seen this yet, but I've had multiple people recommend it to me. Josh, have you had a chance to catch it?
I did, yeah, and I'll agree with Jason. It's a really strong movie. I love when something that wasn't anywhere on my radar comes out of nowhere and just sort of wallops me, and that's definitely what happens here. It is not the movie you think it is. I think that one of the only things it's got going against it is just that is a really bad title, and I think it's gonna throw people off, because anytime I've told people in the last couple of weeks after I watched it, you've got to watch this movie. It's on Prime. It's one everybody has, so you should be able to watch it. And they're like, "What's it called?" And I tell them, and they just kind of do the cocked eyebrow thing. And I'm like, I probably ignore the title. The movie's really good. The performances are really strong, and like you said, Maisie Stella's fantastic, and we are living in a year of, we may talk later, the year of Nicholas Hoult. I think this is also like an Aubrey Plaza year as well. Where
I was going to say, as someone who has a big Aubrey Plaza crush, that's been the real appeal of checking this thing out.
Yeah, she's they use her wisely, where she doesn't overshadow the lesser known actors, but when she's there, like it's a really great performance.
Okay, Josh, let's hear about your number 5 now.
Well, I kind of did the same thing Jason did, where I feel like everybody is sort of like clustering around the same handful of movies, and so I wanted to kind of shout out this movie that I feel like is going under the radar, and it's a thriller called Red Rooms, and it is a French-Canadian movie about this, I guess, since it's international, this global obsession we have right now with true crime. And so you have essentially, what is this? There's like a high profile trial of a serial killer going on in Canada, and people who are like podcast junkies and all that, like he has his little groupies and followers, and we sort of enter into this twisted world through a woman who, it feels like that shouldn't be her cup of tea. She's like a fairly high profile model, and so she's like kind of like juggling her modeling career with her obsession with the serial killer. And you just kind of see like over the course of the film, the effect that getting involved in something like this has on the soul and the psyche, and just how it kind of degrades your humanity. And it's, am I selling it as just like a feel-good movie yet? It's one of those that, like, again, didn't know anything about it. It was one I was like, all right, I need some international films to kind of bulk up my list. And it's one I watched, earlier in the year, and it's one of those that I just haven't been able to shake. The performances are fantastic, especially from the main actress, whose name is Juliette Garapi. I'm probably mangling that pronunciation, but she's got a really complicated role, like more than it seems like it would be on the surface, and she's got to juggle a lot of different moods and tones and emotions all at the same time, and I think she pulls it off really well. So that's my number 5.
I really like this movie, and this brings up sort of like an interesting idea of like us talking about how people find movies. This is a movie I wasn't aware of until I don't. Are you guys on Letterboxd? I know like I'm a big Letterboxd person, and this is a movie I found because people I knew were like logging it on Letterboxd, and was something I had no idea what it was or like hadn't heard of it, and just I think the ability of like an app like that for people that are interested in movies to just sort of like, oh, here's this like random French Canadian thriller, which I would agree with Josh. I think it's really good, and it's just been kind of like percolating in the back of my head because it's got some really just sort of like nightmarish moments in it. But I would say anyone, like, if you're a David Fincher fan, like, go check out this movie. Like, this is like perfectly in your wheelhouse. Jason, have you gotten a chance to see it yet?
I haven't gotten a chance to see it. It's been one of the ones on my list. We've been inundated with screeners and stuff like that, and it's hard to keep up at times. Sorry.
Well, my number 5 is I'm gonna break open the spice cabinet to talk about our dear friend Denis Villeneuve and Timothée Chalamet and the miraculous world of Arrakis. My number 5 is Dune Part 2, which I feel like looking back on the year, I was a little bit surprised that this like slid into my top 5, if only because like it came out in March, and I was like, oh man, what a treasure trove of movies that we're going to have this year, that like this is coming out in March or something like that. But looking back months later, this to me is kind of like the big blockbuster event of the year. Whether it is box office wise, who cares? But like this to me was the thing that like encapsulated that like big event movie that everyone gets excited for, and you go and it has just sort of like the scope and escapism that so many of us crave out of the movies, and just kind of like this perfect synthesis of like all of these really talented craftspeople all coming together and just sort of transporting you to this completely different world, and you just being sucked into it. It is a movie that I've gone back and watched sections of, whether on like HBO Max or like sitting in a hotel room and being like, oh, the worm riding scene is about to come on, or being on a plane and being like, oh, I got like half an hour left until we land, I'm just gonna throw on like the final act of Dune 2. And really it just really is an example to me of like how, as much as we as critics kind of beat up on like franchise entertainment, like here is ostensibly like the middle film in what will be a trilogy adapted from these science fiction novels that is itself kind of a miraculous work of filmmaking, and is what happens when you just get people who are like the absolute like apex of their departments, whether it's like special effects, production design, the cast who are all good in here. I think we'll definitely have to put a pin in the Timothée Chalamet conversation, who, I mean, after this movie, like it seems like it's pretty solidified. Like he is the big star of his generation at this point.
He's the Leonardo DiCaprio of his generation. There's no question about it.
Yeah, and even like the balls of this movie be like, here's a big, highly anticipated franchise sequel that, to not put too fine a point on it, like ends in a pretty downer note and is kind of like the Empire Strikes Back for this series, I would presume. I don't have no idea what Dune Part 3 is going to be, but I had a blast watching this thing, and it's been one that I've returned to. I assume you guys are with me. Have you taken the spice?
Yeah, it didn't make my top 5, but it's definitely gonna show up in my top 10 somewhere, where it's, as someone who was, we'll say, mixed to positive on the first installment, just because it was very much half a movie. Once you watch part 2, it kind of went back and made the first part even stronger for me. So I love when a movie does that it kind of makes you reassess your feelings on how it fits in the overall narrative together. And I think some things this one had going for it that the first one didn't was, not that it's, a full-blown comedy, but there's a lot more humor in the second half. It feels like it takes itself and its stuff seriously, but it's not as self-serious. It's much more of like an adventure epic this time around than some sort of like religious text, which is how the first one felt to me. So yeah, it's big winner for me.
I will go ahead and say that I originally had Dune Part 2 as my number 5 film, And when I saw that Jesse was going to talk about it, I went, okay, I'll bump it down because it gives me a chance to talk about my old ass. But that is not because Dune Part 2 is not an outstanding film. I think the thing that impressed me the most with it was it is a dense, difficult story to understand. Like we talk a lot about world building when it comes to making sci-fi kind of films. This is like world building on a whole different level. The amount of background you need to understand what's going on, just all aspects of it. And Denis Villeneuve pulled it off incredibly well, made it accessible to an audience that is not familiar with Dune, which is just not easy to do. We've seen
very
people try
dense,
this.
very weird book. Like, it is unusual that this is a pop culture phenomenon.
Yeah. And we've seen people try to pull this off in the past and fail. I mean, like, really badly fail. But it works. It is totally accessible. It was a big hit. It looks fabulous. When you think about what Best Picture is, to me, it is putting together all the different parts of making a movie good. You have to have good actors. You have to have good camera work. It's everything involved in that. And Dune 2 does it just about as well as any other film out there this year. It's a great movie. It probably deserves to be higher on our list than it is.
Okay, Jason, what's your number 4? A movie that you think is higher than Dune?
Yes. So I'm going to go with The Wild Robot.
Okay.
Which is the best
Josh,
animated.
this is on your list as well, right?
It is, and it's my top 5 is like they're so close together. It's my number 2 of the year, but I think it had the same kind of effect on me that Jason's going to talk about.
I mean, it's the best animated film of the year. It harkens back to me to some of the really great animated films of my lifetime. Films like The Iron Giant, that aren't necessarily like the great Pixar, although there are certainly some great Pixar films, but it's one of these movies where there are no humans in it. And as a result, you're able to talk about humanity in some really compelling ways by using animals, by using robots and things like that. It has an incredible message about parenting. If you are, I have 2 kids who have both flown the nest and are now living lives on their own. This film absolutely hit home in terms of the emotions of being a parent and what it feels to be proud of your child and the difficulties of raising your child. But in addition to all that messaging kind of stuff, it's gorgeous. I mean, this is one of those animated films where every single scene is a work of art. I don't even know how, some of the background, some of the scenery, I don't know how they did it because it looks so much like it belongs in a museum. So when you're telling me that you're going to have a story that is emotional and draws you in, combined with visuals that are among the best that we've seen in years, no question in my mind. And actually, I should point out, by the way, I think being best animated film of the year is a super high bar. I mean, like last year, the Into the Spider-Verse was easily among one of the top few films of the year. We're going to have a sequel to that next year that I think will be among the top few films of the year again. And I think this year, the best animated film is just, there's such competition there. It's just almost always a great movie. And this movie is a great, great movie that everyone can enjoy. Children, adults, grandparents, you name it. It's truly a movie for everyone, which is something that we don't get to say all that often. Josh, now you can talk about it even more because I had it at number 4, you got it at number 2. You got to like it even more than I did.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, and I think Jason and I were at the screening together, and at sort of differing stages of the parenting journey. His kids have flown the coop. I've got a 14-year-old daughter who I can see that coming just around the corner. And so, yeah, it hits really hard, but I think from the kids' perspective, maybe hits just as hard in a different way because in addition to showing, the parent-child journey from the parents' direction, it also kind of shows children the sacrifices that parents make as well, because, to make it selfish and all about me, right? There's scenes where you have the robot learning what it is to be human and going from feeling that, one of the biggest laugh lines in the movie for me is like where this possum's talking to her about her, feelings as a parent. She's like, "What do you feel?" And she's like, "Crushing obligation," and how the robot goes from that to like genuinely having these real emotional, strong family connections to this chosen adopted family that she's got going. And the other thing I really love about this, in an era where even more than usual, it feels like you're casting actors to voice characters just because that way you can get their names on the posters, and you're like, without naming any Nintendo plumbers or lasagna loving cats. But even though you have people like Lupita Nyong'o and Pedro Pascal, who are definitely big names, they're acting here. I didn't know that was Pedro Pascal as the Fox until I saw his name in the credits. He's genuinely getting into the role of a character, not just cashing a check. And so,
Lupita Nyong'o's voice work as the robot is off the charts.
Yeah,
good.
absolutely.
She's very good.
Yeah. And so yeah, those were, in addition to everything Jason said, those were the things that stood out to me just as something really, truly special, and continues to make Chris Sanders one of the filmmakers that if I see his name on a project, it's just, mandatory ticket, my butt's in the seat.
All right, Josh, what's your number 4 now that we've talked about the wild robot?
My number 4 is one that I honestly thought would be dominating more this season, which is Sing Sing, which is it's a super critically acclaimed drama about prison inmates who kind of, heal and become rehabilitated through acting. And, as we all know, Hollywood loves movies about itself. And, something that's about like the healing power of art and acting feels like a no-brainer, but it feels like for some reason it's not really picking up steam, and that's a shame for me, because Coleman Domingo is fantastic as always.
So good.
And,
that I think should be the front runner for best actor.
Yeah,
in my
I can't
opinion.
disagree. And and then you've got that he's sharing the screen with people who have really lived this experience, especially somebody who kind of with you I think should be a shoe-in for best supporting actor, which is Clarence Macklin, who plays, if Coleman Domingo is like the veteran of this program, he's like the rookie who's coming in, and we're seeing it through his new experience. And this movie could have been so many cliches and tropes and stereotypes, and it doesn't totally avoid all of them, but the fact that it is not some like, dreary prison tragedy about black trauma, where it feels like the only reason you're supposed to vote for this is because it's the important thing to do. It's a genuinely good, heartfelt movie where these characters have little victories and setbacks, and they connect themselves to the audience strongly enough that you feel like every little win and every big loss that these characters feel. It's a great experience.
Okay. My number 4 is Challengers. The Luca Guadagnino sexy sports drama starring Zendaya, Josh O'Connor, and Mike Feist. A movie that, Josh, I don't remember if you were at that. I think you probably were, but I distinctly remember Jason and I just walking out and just sort of fist bumping the air of just yes, we got one. And, it maybe didn't turn into the I think we walked out and we were this movie's going to take America by storm. And it didn't really do that. Although I was recently doing an international trip, and I have to say, getting to my point about good movies find people, the Challengers and Twisters were the 2 most watched movies, just looking around to the other seats on the plane that people were watching. And it is the kind of movie that I would love just to have more of. It reminds me of our last episode. We talked about Ridley Scott's filmography, and we talked about Thelma and Louise, and how that movie is kind of this great package of a really fun, smart script with sexy, charismatic actors at the center of it, and a really, really stylish director who just understands the material and knows how to give it that just extra oomph of cinematic pleasure. And that's kind of what this movie is. It is this fun, sexy, unpredictable sports drama that is also powered by I don't know if you guys are Spotify users, but this past week was the unveiling of everyone's Spotify Wrapped, and the theme song to this movie was my like most listened to track of the year. Just like god level Trent Reznor, Atticus Ross score that even I know plenty of people who maybe like saw the movie and were a little bit lukewarm on it, but like have told me, oh, that soundtrack, like that's on my workout playlist. Like I listen to that all the time.
As it should
it is
be.
just yeah, it's just one of the most like purely fun movies that I saw last year, and the kind of thing that I'm just like, Hollywood, just like it shouldn't be that hard. Just give something that is just like this fun and infectious and sexy and stylish, and is just like getting so much mileage out of just like the intense chemistry of people on screen.
Right.
Jason, I know it's high on your list as well. So
right, I'm going to go next because it's number 2 on my list, and boy, I came this close. It was almost number 1 on my list.
Yeah.
You talk about the score. Something happened when this movie ended that I have never had happen to me in a movie theater. The credits start rolling, everyone's sitting there enjoying it, and like the third or fourth credit was score by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. And when those words came up on the screen, everyone in the theater applauded. Yeah. I want you to think about that. I want you to dwell on that for a moment. The entire theater, which was all full of film critics, we didn't applaud for Luca, for the director, or the stars, or anything like that. We're sitting there and we saw those names of Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, and all of us simultaneously, spontaneously broke into applause. That's how great the score is. Like having nothing to do with the score, the film is, like you said, Jesse, so much fun to watch. You get engrossed in the story. You think you're in a Zendaya film, but you're really in a Josh O'Connor and Mike Feist film. I mean, the two male leads just absolutely crush it in this movie. It's the horniest film I've ever seen in my life. My wife was asking me about it, and she's like, oh, is this a movie we could watch with friends? Or are we going to feel awkward because there's all this sex going on? I'm like, there's actually not that much sex. It's just everyone wants to have sex.
The tennis is the sex.
It's, and Jesse, the biggest thing for me is I still can't believe that this movie wasn't a huge runaway success.
Yeah.
I don't get it. I know it did well, but how on earth? I don't understand how everyone who saw it didn't immediately do what I did and walk out and tell every person they know, you need to see this movie. It's got star power. It's gorgeous to look at. It has an incredible score. And by the way, a fun film from the standpoint of if you like movies, because he puts the camera in the tennis ball for half the movie. And it's just great to watch the camera bounce around like crazy. It's really creatively directed.
Yeah.
In a movie where, something like Deadpool and Wolverine gets all this credit for like audience pleasing moments or whatever, there is, not that I would ever dream of spoiling anything. There is a moment there's something that happens in the last few minutes of this movie that when it happens, kind of like Jason was saying with the score credit, like everybody in the theater reacted like it was this like giant pressure release valve. It's the exact kind of thing that happens when like nerds spot an Easter egg in a Marvel movie or something, but like just it plays the audience like a fiddle. Like it's just a really fun time at the movies.
Actually, wait, can I ask a question? Josh, why is it not in your top 5?
Oh, it's in my top 10 for sure. Yeah, it's because you told me to do my top 5, not my top 10. It's a great film.
Okay, so that was my number 4. Jason, let's go to your number 3.
My number 3 is a film called September 5th. This is a movie that was made for me. For folks who don't know, I'm a longtime journalist at CNN. I've spent much of my life, my working life, in a television control room, which is a very unique place. And I've told many a story over the years to friends and on podcasts and such about the remarkable energy that comes from a television control room that's really unlike anything I've experienced anywhere else. September 5th is the story of the television control room in Munich, Germany for ABC Sports when Black September, a Palestinian terrorist group, breaks into the Olympic Village and takes 11 Israeli athletes hostage. And over the course of basically one day, because I mean, from the title September 5th, you understand this takes place in one day. Over the course of basically one day, they inflict terror on the Olympics in a way that we've never seen before or since. And it's not told from the perspective of what's happening inside the terrorist incident. It's told from the perspective of the people who had to cover it. Again, ABC Sports, not ABC News. ABC Sports journalists who didn't have cell phones. They didn't have a lot of live satellite coverage and things like that. All the things that I have had throughout my career as a journalist, they didn't have most of them. And these people had to, this is the first time in history that a terrorist incident was covered live like this. And they had to make incredible moral questions. They had to jury rig and figure out how to cover this thing that they weren't prepared to cover. And by the way, they're not traditional journalists. They're folks who usually cover volleyball, boxing, and swimming. The movie is pulse pounding. You cannot look away for it's only 90 minutes or so. By the way, we never get short movies, but it is a perfect length. You can't look away the entire time. There are a number of great performances at the core. And I think it's fabulously directed. And to me, my only question was if I even put it higher on my list. It's clearly one of the best made films of the year and an important film for people to see and understand.
Yeah, it's as someone who also works in TV news, it did give me the feeling of like, man, technology has made this job so much less cool. Of like, you know, when you're seeing scenes where it's just sort of like, all right, we got to like pull this map out to then like figure out like, okay, we got to then like sneak tape into the like athlete village. And
there's a whole like spy aspect of this,
right? Where I was just sort of like, dang, that's just like not an issue anymore because of technology. And be like, we've taken the sexy drama out of this. But yeah, I would definitely like put this in the pile of, you know, there's a kind of movie where I feel like the pleasure you get out of it, and we might talk about this more on the next episode once it's out in theaters, but like a kind of movie where like your enjoyment of it is just seeing people who are like really good at their job just do their job, and like just immersing you in the like tiny details of like, we got to get this camera here to capture this thing, or then like people having arguments in the hallway about like, should we cut to this thing, is that morally ethical, and then people in the control room are just like hitting buttons and like boop, 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 boop. And you know, it's if you just love the enjoyment of just sort of like, I even if I don't understand what's going on, I just like the thrill of seeing like people who are really good at their job just do their job, then this is kind of a movie for you.
It is next on my list in the ocean of screeners that are taking up my inbox. That's the one I'm watching tonight, so I'm excited.
Okay,
you're gonna love it, Josh. It's you're gonna really love it.
Okay, Josh, what is your number 3?
My number 3, I think, is the same as your number 3, which is The Brutalist.
Dum-dum-dum!
Which is the bane of Jason's existence right now, as I'm sure he'll tell us in a little bit. But this is one of those that, you know, buzz started building for it when it was coming, you know, going through the festival circuit. And it was one of those where it felt like the build-up was resulting in a thing where I was just going to be ultimately let down. And I was like, oh, a 3-hour and 40-minute movie with a 15-minute intermission about a World War II survivor who is like, you know, experiencing the American dream and, you know, as an immigrant, it checks all the Oscar boxes, right? But I was like, is this one of those things where, you know, it's like I'm supposed to love it rather than actually loving it? And within the first like 15 or 20 minutes of this story I was in, and just really feels epic in a way that you don't see a lot of movies feel these days. You know, unless it's like something like Dune or a Marvel movie where you have to have like action or sci-fi constraints. But when it's just like a really important story told really well, and to have it feel like you just went on a journey with the characters after almost 4 hours, just really was like emotionally affecting. I was blown away by like the technical achievements of the film, especially if the budget is to be believed. I'm not sure if I believe the budget numbers or not, but the fact that the director Brady Corbett, I think you're supposed to say Corbet or something. He's, it's all fancy now. But yeah, the fact that he's able to do that on a relatively shoestring budget and make it feel like a $200 million movie was just mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, I think the I've been trying to think of like what to compare it to for people, and this is a movie I definitely think we need to like Jason, especially once you see it, like devote like a whole episode, like especially once it comes out over the Christmas holidays, because it is just such a meaty text of a movie, and it's such a like big swing. Here is like an epic drama. Like the things I've been comparing it to are things like Once Upon a Time in America or Godfather Part 2. Not saying it is like as good as like Godfather Part 2, but just to give you an idea of like the scope of just the timeline of this movie, the themes and ideas it is talking about, in terms of like I think this is a movie that you could see as really about what it's like to be an artist and like have to combat with sort of financiers and having this big vision, and how do you like express that big vision and convince other people to sort of buy into your vision, which even then is fascinating in a movie that is essentially Brady Corbet doing like a huge big swing. Like this is my like magnum opus movie. And like you said, Josh, it is over 3 hours. There's an intermission. I kind of remember at the screening that I was at, like a few of us afterwards in the lobby, like at the intermission, we're just sort of like, this is really flying. Like just kind of like talking around like, this is really, really good. And that sort of like pleasant surprise of like the hype living up to it. It's such a rich feast of a movie, and kind of what the movies that have been my highlights for this year are ones where I think I'm getting into the zone where I'm just like, just go for it.
Yeah.
Like, don't be thinking about trying to like, oh, but what if the audience thinks this about that? It's just like, no, just go for it. Yeah. And this is a case of like someone who just goes for it, and it largely really pays off. Of, even to compare it to another movie about an architect that came out this year, like the Megalopolis movie, which this is infinitely better than Megalopolis, but even then, like the bit of enjoyment I had with Megalopolis was just sort of like, well, he at least went for it. And that like this is a case of like Brady Corbet is not making this movie for anyone, but just sort of like his passion and vision for this story and what it has to say about being an artist, what it has to say about the refugee experience in America, what it has to say about being an immigrant in America. I think there's a lot of aspects of it that are very timely now, post-election. It's just like a huge, like massive feast of a movie that it is the movie I am most looking forward to watching again, because I just have to imagine there's just so much more to uncover and discover. And like, we didn't even mention Adrian Brody, like a career best performance from Adrian Brody, who like might win another Oscar. Guy Pearce, I think, is kind of unbelievable in this movie. It is just sort of like an incredible work that you walk out of and you just can't be, you're just blown away by just the vision you're seeing on screen is kind of unreal.
Okay, so you guys know, for the past 2 weeks, I've done nothing but complain that I haven't had a chance to see this movie. The screening that they did, I was out of town and I could not make it to the screening, and they have refused to send a screener. I've sent numerous emails to A24 begging them. I know other people have said, you've got to send out screeners for this film. I don't know why they haven't. Gentlemen, literally 5 minutes ago.
I was just about to say, breaking news.
I just checked my inbox. I just got a screener for it. Now, I'm a little pissed. We have less than 48 hours to go until our ballots are due, until everything is finalized.
It's going to take up 1/10 of the time you have left.
I mean, God, it's 3 hours and 40 minutes.
It will fly, Jason. I mean, I'm very fascinated to see what you think of this movie, because definitely watching it, there are aspects of it where it's just like, this is so in your wheelhouse of kind of movie, while also then there's some other stuff like in the second half of the movie where it's like, Will Jason like this? This is kind of getting a little like surreal and art house, and like I'm loving this, but like I will be just sort of like immensely fascinated to what you think of it. But like even the stuff of it that I don't know about you, Josh, that I kind of bumped up against in sort of the weeks since, I'm just sort of like, that's small potatoes. The stuff that I love about it is just like so insanely good, and I can't believe that like they were able to make this at like a $6 million budget, this huge sort of epic sized, very earnest American epic that is just like about so much that we could honestly talk about for hours.
We could. The last thing I'll say about it is it was interesting and fascinating to me that it's almost like you have like he made a movie and its weirder sequel together.
Yes.
And just them in the same movie, because it's like you have a fairly standard immigrant story in the first half, which even if it's fairly standard, is still a great story. And then it's what happens in that guy's life in the back half that just kind of shows you the crazy evolving nature of the American dream.
It becomes a much darker, more, kind of prickly movie in its second half compared to the first half, which is really like a William Wyler movie, basically.
All right, so my number 2 we already did, that was Challengers.
Yes.
And one of you guys who already did your number 2 as well.
Yeah, Josh did his number 2. My number 2 is you guys' number 1. So do we just want to talk about it now?
We should just skip to number 1.
Well,
yeah,
your number 2.
Now, right? Yeah.
My number 2 is you guys' number 1. Which is Anora, which we've talked about on a previous episode, but it's a fantastic movie. Sean Baker's Palme d'Or winning manic romantic comedy about a stripper played by Mikey Madison who falls for the vape pen twirling charm of a young Russian oligarch and the manic crazy adventure that they go on. It's Pretty Woman by way of Uncut Gems. It is just, pure like movie adrenaline candy for me. It is like just so up my wheelhouse. I'm a bit surprised it's not my number 1, but we'll get to that in a bit. Guys, the floor is yours. Why was it the number 1 movie for you guys this year? Don't maul the mic all at once.
I thought Josh would go. I mean, for me, it's Mikey Madison's performance.
Yeah, performance of the year.
I think so. Yeah, she's gonna be my best actress pick. And if there was no best actor, like if it was gender neutral, she would be my pick as well.
Agreed.
What she does in this film, I think, is a very brave performance, a very revealing performance. The film hinges on you connecting with her, liking her, and wanting, nothing but good things to happen to her, and that's not as easy to pull off as people may think. She's incredible in this movie. They're supporting characters who feel like they are nothing, and then they eventually bubble up into being really you get emotionally connected to characters who like have had 5 lines.
Yeah.
It's just
or people you think are like the villains of the movie that then like 30 minutes later you're like, oh, I really feel for this person, and kind of like they're in just as much of a kind of like prickly uncomfortable situation as her.
Yeah, I think to me that like as great a job as Sean Baker does directing this film, I think he did an even better job on the script, because it does take you to some places with these characters that you would not expect. And it's a joy to watch. It's an easy watch, and yet it's a film that just you want to talk about it after it's done, and you want to spend more time with these people and understand what makes them tick. And I love your description. The Pretty Woman meets Uncut Gems is chef's kiss. That is the perfect description of both the tension of the film and also the degree to which we connect with the story.
Yeah. Josh, how did you feel about it?
Yeah, not to make the sort of end of our list or nearing the end of our list kind of anticlimactic, but ditto. Yeah, everything that y'all just said. It's a movie that lets you know right away what it's going for and whether, and lets you know, like, okay, if you're not comfortable with this, you still got time to go get your money back on a ticket. And if you're willing to go along for the ride, and invest in these characters, even if you're not comfortable or familiar with the life that they lead, you come along for the ride. And he, like you said, Sean Baker really makes you empathize with characters that in a lesser movie would just be stereotypes or cliches or even, background extras. If this was an 80s action movie with Sylvester Stallone, Honora would be like on the stage for 10 seconds as he walks through to find the villain or something. And to have Sean Baker go, no, let's make that stripper in the background the main character and give her an actual life is fascinating. And, makes you care about her so much that this really affecting, ambiguous final scene really hits you like a ton of bricks and makes you realize, is it a little too long at 2 hours, 15 minutes? Maybe, but that added time that you have spending with those characters really makes those final moments hit harder than I think they would have in like a 90-minute movie.
It's really weird for me that this is like such a big awards front runner, not because I don't love it, but because it almost seems too cool for like the Oscars. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Of like the idea that like Sean Baker, this like kind of hip, scuzzy, somewhat provocative little like independent filmmaker who makes movies about like folks on like the margins edge of society
He makes movies about sex workers.
Right. And has just sort of like taken Hollywood by storm with this movie is like really unexpected, but also like if it wins Best Picture, like I'll be thrilled. It'll be like when Parasite won, I'll just be like, oh, awesome. Like it worked out for one of the good ones. Yeah. And it's a movie that, even thinking about it in the context of like movie history, it has the scuzziness of like 70s American New Hollywood, but yet it also feels connected to like 40s screwball comedies, but yet feels something like modern and of now. It's just, I wouldn't be surprised if like in a couple years it's the movie from this year that I've like rewatched the most.
Nothing to add, man. I think you're absolutely right. It's a film I'm looking forward to rewatching with my wife, possibly with my kids, my adult kids. But yeah, it's a film that I think appeals to people on so many different levels. And again, I just keep going back to those performances, Mikey Madison and everyone surrounding her, and the way your opinions of these people shift over time, and the things it has to say about power. I mean, like there's some henchmen, so to speak, who are major characters in this film, and the degree to which you get to know them is just so surprising and so welcome. And it's just Sean Baker's ability to make you care about every single person on screen is a rare gift, and I'm thrilled that we got to experience it this year.
Well, speaking of empathy and unique visions, my number one movie of the year is Nickel Boys, which is also, like The Brutalist, kind of coming out over the Christmas holidays. This is an adaptation of a Pulitzer Prize winning Colson Whitehead novel that is also very, very good. And I really went into this like not really sure what to expect. I think I had read the novel, so I was familiar with the novel and thought the novel was fantastic. But, a great novel doesn't always make a great film because they're two different mediums. What's great about a novel is often the prose, the style in which it is written, the way the author is sort of describing this story to you. And I had also heard the movie was very experimental in nature. And so went in maybe expecting like, oh, this will maybe be kind of like maybe an interesting intellectual exercise, but maybe like feel a little cold as a movie. Not true. I was so blown away both formally at what this movie is doing, while also how that form connected to me as a viewer, and the director Ramel Ross, who's mostly done documentary work, taking this novel and saying, I'm going to keep the story, we're going to keep the story intact, but yet understanding that what's great about the novel is the way it's written, and what can I do cinematically that like you can only do in movies and only do with the camera and only do cinematically to bring this story to life on screen, which is, you know, having it play out. This is basically a story about young men who wind up at this sort of like abusive juvenile detention facility in Florida, and it has a lot of parallels to the civil rights movement. And just the way that this movie plays out in being so much from like first person point of view, and how that connects you as an audience to the characters. And it made me feel so alive and optimistic, and walked out of it feeling like, you know what, for whatever, like, you know, arguments we want to have about the state of the business, about the state of movies as an art form, like, it's so invigorating to me to see something like this where it's like there are still people out there that are experimenting and trying to find new ways of visual storytelling, and more importantly, I think looking for how can I use the cinematic language of movies to connect empathy with other people. That like great Roger Ebert quote that I think about all the time about how like movies are at their best when they're vehicles for generating empathy with other people and like helping you feel close to others that are on this same life journey as us. And this movie just, I think, was able to give me that feeling in the most unexpected way possible. I'm really excited for people to check this movie out. I'm sure some people might find it a little odd or off, or like just a little maybe too formally experimental, but like for me, I was just sort of totally blown away by it as someone who went in being like, oh, this will, I'm sure, maybe be like, you know, interesting cinematography or something like that, and really, really connected with it. And I think it is one of the best examples of like adaptation that I have ever seen. Have you guys had a chance to check it out yet?
I did. I actually got a chance to watch it earlier today, and right there with you on the things that you were saying. I think you probably ended up loving it a little bit more than I did. It's not a bad movie by any stretch of the imagination, so I'm really glad I watched it. Performances are fantastic. Like you said, the cinematography is incredible. The score is really great, and you can really tell that Ramel Ross got his start as a documentarian. This feels almost like a fictional documentary, you know, like it's a documentary about fictional characters addressing very, very real world issues. And it's, like you said, like there's a tweet went around back when Twitter was a thing where somebody was like, I can't explain to you why it matters to care about other people. Like, that's not something I should have to explain. You just should care about other people. And it's almost like Ramel Ross took that idea and said, okay, you don't care about these people. What if you're the people? You know? And to see that these things are happening to the viewer and putting you literally in that perspective is very unconventional, but I think it works here. And I feel like that, you know, at 2 hours, 20 minutes, it feels like it hammers its points home a little too often, but you know, I think the characters are endearing enough, or the characters are interesting enough, and the actors are endearing enough that you don't mind spending time with them on that journey. And it does some really, kind of like with The Brutalist, does some really interesting things in the back half of the movie that doesn't feel like a bait and switch, because if you think back on it, you realize it's been in plain sight the whole time.
Yeah. There's definitely a moment later in the movie where like you could feel like the whole audience basically like gasp at once when you know the way the form of the movie has been playing out. You realize what you have actually been watching this entire time is a bit different than what you expected. Guys, I want to close this off really quick. If you have any last little recommendations for people, what's one movie that you feel like has just been criminally overlooked this year that you want to give out a recommendation for? Jason, we'll start with you.
Wow. So I kind of did that with My Old Ass. I put it in my top 5. That was my film that I felt like people hadn't talked about enough. So there's my recommendation. My number 5 film, My Old Ass.
All right, I think for me, I mentioned a couple weeks ago, I think, but I really want to go to bat one more time for Strange Darling. I think this has been a
Great film.
incredible year for genre movies, and those are the ones that get overlooked a lot this time of year, you know, because we have to like the fancy, sophisticated stuff, and the fancy, sophisticated stuff is great. Don't get me wrong, but sometimes it's just fun to dive into a trashy thriller with good performances from people who know exactly what kind of movie they're making, and they make it really well.
Yeah.
You know, Josh, one thing I'll say about that is I think this has been a great year. I don't want to say for time travel, but for films that sort of mess with time and put you at different places in time, which is something that Strange Darling does tremendously well. I already talked, you know, My Old Ass has a time travel, so to speak, aspect to it. There's a romance film, We Live in Time, with Florence Pugh and Andrew Garfield, that I think is greatly elevated by having us experience it in different time periods. It's it's an obvious storytelling trick, but I think this year we got a number of movies that just did a great job with it. Strange Darlings is a fabulous pick for that.
Yeah, really fun, really cool genre movie. I guess my recommendation would be another genre movie that I think is like super underrated. Juror Number 2, Clint Eastwood like released, I think, like his best movie since like the mid 90s this year, and Warner Brothers just sort of like shat it out and like ignored it. And
just saying, David Zaslav is a terrible person.
And like I watched this movie, and even then like the reactions I had heard were like, oh, it's you know, it's a fun throwback to like, you know, like mid 90s kind of John Grisham legal thrillers. And like I watched it with just like that expectation and was like, this is like one of the most like confidently made yet understated movies that also like just creates so many moral quandaries for its characters, and like asks you as an audience and does not hold your hand, and is just sort of like, you as an audience need to like figure out how you feel about this. And like so many different like weird like knotted debates to have about what is morally right and wrong in any given situation. And I just like, I don't understand what Warner Brothers was doing with that movie. Of like, I watched it, I was like, holy cow, this is like, and I'm someone who can be pretty critical about late period Clint Eastwood, and this was like one of the best things I think he's made since like that period of like Unforgiven, Bridges of Madison County, Perfect World, like that era of Eastwood's movies, which I think is my favorite. And this is just like him making a genre movie that is not trying to, you know, elevate itself, but yet is confident that it just has like a really, really good script, and is confident that its audience is mature enough to be able to handle it.
Yeah.
And the star is Nicholas Hoult, who we talked about, you know, Timothée Chalamet as this generation's Leonardo DiCaprio. If there's anyone who's going to challenge him, I think it's Nicholas Hoult, who had a great year, and like
Have you guys seen Nosferatu yet?
Yes.
So a great would make a great double feature with Juror Number 2, as just like Nicholas Hoult gets cucked on screen, basically.
And if you want to add, another, this has been a crazy year for him. The Order, which hits theaters.
I haven't checked that out yet.
I haven't seen it either, but I've heard great things about it.
Fantastic in this. So this has been like a crazy year for Nicholas Hoult. He's Lex Luthor next year, so gonna have an even better
that's
year.
right. Wow.
And by the way, one more recommendation: if you love Nicholas Hoult, which you should, the TV series that he did, The Great, about Catherine the Great, he's so fabulous in that. It is such a fun watch. It's only 3 seasons. I wish it had been more than 3. It's check out The Great.
Well, guys, we've made it to the end of another year. In the coming weeks, I'm sure we'll talk about more of the kind of like awardsy stuff that's coming out. I think we're going to try and talk a little bit more about stuff like The Brutalist and September 5th. Maybe touch on Queer, Luca Guadagnino's other movie. And then, you know, we got we got
Mufasa.
We got The Lion King. That's true. Did you read that Barry Jenkins profile in New York Magazine?
Ooh.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna leave it as like a fascinating read, and maybe we can talk more about it when we see that movie. And of course the Bob Dylan movie, which I think will be another fascinating text for 3 generations of white men to talk and unpack the mythology of Bob Dylan. So our listeners have that to look forward to.